video about the Russo Gambit that you can see right now on the screen, and it became one of my most popular videos ever, and I've received tons of positive feedback from you guys from playing this opening and crushing your opponents. And many of you wrote in comments that it's basically the Vienna Gambit with the reversed color. So I thought to myself, hey, then why didn't I present you the Vienna Gambit for white? Because indeed, it's essentially the same opening. Here's how you get to the Vienna Gambit playing white. After e4, black responds pawn e5, and now instead of the usual move knight to f3, you play knight c3, reserving the opportunity to play pawn f4 on the next move, and getting something like an improved version of the King's Gambit, where you do have all the same advantages of the King's Gambit as early attack and fight for the center, but you don't have a lot of the downsides of the King's Gambit, so it's less risky. And because you can play the same setup as white, in that case it's called the Vienna Gambit, and as black, in that case it would be called the Russo Gambit, you'll have a lot of experience in this opening, you will know all the typical ideas, tactical patterns, and you will easily outplay your opponents who are usually completely unaware of these openings, and even if they know something, it's usually very little. Alright, let's explore this opening. So knight c3, again, you're delaying development of your kingside knight because you are leaving this option of pushing pawn f4 on the next move. And there are lots of ways for black to spoil this position very quickly. For example, some of your opponents, many, will respond knight f6. Actually, black usually responds either knight f6 or knight c6, developing one of the knights, because classical chess theory says that we gotta develop knights before bishops. When your opponent goes for knight f6 and you continue with pawn f4, if your opponent is unfamiliar with the theory of the Vienna Gambit, they're highly likely to get into trouble very quickly. What's the problem here? The most played move by black here, because they're challenged in the center, you're going to capture this pawn. The most popular move of black is simply to capture, by analogy with the King's Gambit, where this pawn takes f4 is the main move by black. But because we've got the knights out, it actually changes the situation, and pawn takes f4 is a big blunder for black, because now you just push pawn e5, and all of a sudden it turns out that even though seemingly this knight has a lot of ways to move forward, all those squares are already under the control of white's pieces. Therefore, the knight has to go back. And after that, a couple moves in the game, black still has all their pieces on the original square. Almost like black realized that they're lost and they're setting it up for the next game. And actually, you already have a completely dominant and winning position. The one thing you gotta watch over in all these variations of the Vienna Gambit is that since you played this move pawn f4, it a little bit weakens this diagonal, and you always need to watch over this check, potentially queen h4. It's really easy to stop it, so it's not an issue at all. It's just that you shouldn't overlook it. And the way to stop it is very simply just play knight f3 first. And on the next move, you're gonna play pawn d4 after whatever black does. Let's say pawn d6, you play pawn d4, you get back the pawn, and then thanks to your huge lead in development, control in the center, and black's piece is completely passive, you're having a completely won game, actually, here. There's one little tactical trick that is worth knowing. Here, if black plays any usual move, you just take here, and everything's great. But what if black takes here on e5? In that case, theoretically, you could recapture here, let's say, with a pawn, but that would allow an exchange of queens. And while it's still fine for white, ideally speaking, you do want to keep queens on the board because you want to attack opponent. And there is a way for you to avoid an exchange of queens by playing queen e2. We're temporarily sacrificing this pawn on e5 because it's currently pinned, and we're going to get it back anyway. There is no way for black to defend it, but by playing this move, you manage to escape from a potential exchange of queens. And after queen to e2, black will play something. Let's say knight to c6 or whatever. Now you can grab this pawn as well, taking advantage of the pin. On the next move, you're going to pick up this pawn on e5. If black wants to neutralize the pin, black will play something like bishop e7. Now you can pick up this pawn on e5, and black is really suffering here. Thanks to this pawn on e5, black can't develop normally. Also, on the next move, you're going to play rook d1 and hit the queen. Also very uncomfortable for black to deal with it. And again, you have huge lead in development, control over the central squares. All is great, you're actually having a winning position here. Alright, so coming back to one of the main positions of this opening, we already know that taking here on f4 is pretty bad for black, because after that you just start pressing black with pawn e5, pushing this knight back, and getting in a dominant position. What else can black do? Black may try defending this pawn with either pawn d6 or knight c6, and actually both moves are bad. And knight c6 is another common way for black to lose the game on the spot. Now after you take on e5 and knight recaptures, you've got d4, and you start once again pressuring black, quite similar to the previous variation. Now when the knight comes back, doesn't really matter where it goes, you keep pushing pawn e5, Similarly, the knight has to go back, and once again we're having a very similar situation to the previous variation, where a couple moves in the game, you're developing your pieces, you control the center, you have a lot of open diagonals for your pieces, and black literally has nothing. All their pieces are completely inactive. So that's another way how you can crush your opponent very quickly. I'm gonna share with you like one game in this variation that just illustrates how quickly your attack can roll here. After d5, white played bishop d3, black played knight e7 because the knight can develop normally because of the pawn, so black decided to develop it here on e7. White castled, black played bishop f5, trying to trade off some pieces and maybe having an easier life, but white responded with the knight g5, and now that's another big advantage of the Vienna Gambit overall, is that you're having this f semi-open file for your rook, and it's ready to target the f7 square, the weakest pawn in black's position, which is in close proximity to the king. And basically black is falling apart here after this exchange. There is already no way for black to defend the f7 pawn, and black is just losing here. It's time to resign. The third way for black to deal with this attack of black's central pawn would be defending this pawn by playing pawn d6. And it looks like a very standard move to just defend the pawn, but that's a passive move that locks this bishop behind the pawns, and definitely it cannot be the refutation of the Vienna Gambit whatsoever. You just play knight f3, keep attacking this pawn with your knight as well. Black defends it, you play bishop b5, you actually got something similar to the rival pass, but with this pawn on f4, which makes your position a lot more active and helps you to influence the center in a better way. Now, thanks to the pin, you're actually renewing the threat to this pawn on e5. Black is gonna play bishop d7, then you play pawn d3 to defend your center, and what I love about this variation is that very often in this position black actually blunders the pawn on the next move. They either play bishop e7 here or pawn a6, which is, you know, even funnier because in that case black actually invites you to win the pawn. But even if black doesn't blunder the pawn, anyway, your position is much more active after castling. You've got these nice pawns in the center of the board, you have the f-file for your rook in the future, and thanks to this space advantage on the king side, you've got great chances to attack there in the middle game. But again, in most cases, black just goes bishop e7, which actually blunders simply the pawn, because now you can eliminate the defender, and then just grab this pawn on e5. Pawn takes, knight takes e5, now you're attacking the bishop, and there's nothing black can do. By the way, notice white was critical for white to play d3 first, so black can't possibly grab here. It will be lost because the pawn is defending. So that's why we play d3 first, and after that we go for this exchange on c6 and we win the pawn. So once again, black tried to play safe, but it didn't really work out and black lost very quickly. Okay, is there any hope for black? Sure it does. The correct response for black here is the counter strike in the center with the move pawn d5, and it's actually usually the right response for black for any kind of opening gambits of white in this after the first move pawn e4. And d5 challenges whites in the center, strikes back, and helps black to stay in the game. Now you take on e5, black recaptures on e4. Once again, you know, as soon as black removes their knight from f6, you gotta watch over this potential check, right? You gotta do something about that. And there are different moves here in this position, but I suggest that you play queen to f3 because I think that practically, in real practical games, it gives you a very nice attacking position. And actually, I gotta say that you shouldn't just turn on the engine and blindly believe to the engine's evaluation, because engine is kind of a depressant when it comes to opening gambits. I mean, there are antidepressants. I don't know if there are depressants. They're called news. Yeah, they exist. Anyway, whenever you check something with the computer, it just tells you that, like in this position, it tells you that black plays pawn f5 and black is slightly better. But like, it's completely unobvious for me how black is better after that, and pretty much nobody plays that anyway. And even after f5, okay, you'll just play d3, you know, force an exchange of knights. Again, it's completely unclear for me how black is better here. So I wouldn't just blindly believe to engine's evaluation. In real life games, your opponents will usually capture here on c3 because that's, you know, the most obvious reaction to this attack of black's knight here on e4. Now, after they recapture, you can recapture by a pawn, and you're actually preparing to castle queenside. And that gives you potentially an interesting attack here. Black goes usually bishop e6 or any other move, doesn't really matter, your moves are gonna be the same. You play bishop f4, bring your bishop out, black plays pawn c5, and now you castle queenside. By casting queenside, you manage not only to hide your king, but also to put your rook to an open position where you can pressure this pawn. For example, in most games, black actually plays knight c6, which is already a blunder. In blunders, the move bishop c4. And we're already taking advantage of this pin, and we're winning this pawn on d5. So basically, you already obtained a winning position. Black here plays queen a5, removing the queen, And in this case, the correct move for white is just the most straightforward. Capture here, just win a pawn and get a technically winning position. So that's the correct move. But I'd like to share with you an interesting game where white played in a more creative way. Perhaps it's not the best way to play, but it is more creative, so I think it's more fun actually to check this variation. White decided to sack and exchange here on d5. And after bishop takes and queen takes, even though white is down material currently, but this threat to f7 square is very bad and very hard for black to deal with. Black played knight, queen to c7. White responded knight h3, another creative move. White is ready to either play knight g5 and renew the attack to the square, or white wants to play rook to f1 and use the rook to also add fuel to the fire of the white's attack. And actually white is winning here. Believe it or not, there is no way for black to stop white's attack. Black played rook d8, attacking the queen. It went back, but white's threat is still the same, knight to g5, threatening knight takes f7. Black played bishop e7, hoping that on the next move black can castle, but it failed to bishop takes f7 sacrifice, king takes, and pawn e6. Nice discovered attack of the queen and check to the king. Therefore black is going to lose the queen and the game. It just shows you again how dangerous the Vienna Gambit can be for black, where black keeps playing normal moves but keeps losing very badly. Now let me also show you the Carlsen way of playing the Vienna Gambit, because I noticed that Magnus Carlsen is actually playing it in Blitz very actively. So far we analyzed black's move knight f6. Another common way is the move knight c6, just mimicking your move. And then you play pawn f4. Well, I gotta make a note here. Pawn f4 in this case is actually quite a risky choice. So if you want to play safe, or like not really safe, it's still an aggressive way, but not to take a lot of risks, then you gotta play bishop c4 and transition into something like the bishop's opening. I've got another video about the bishop's opening. It's one of my favorite openings to play. And then you just delay this move pawn f4 a little bit. You play d3 first, and then you play f4 if suitable, and it gives you a great game without any risk. So again, that's the more appropriate way to play, strictly speaking. But you can still take a little bit of risk and play pawn f4. In this case, what's the trick here? If black captures the pawn, that creates a little bit of a trouble for white, because you gotta deal with this threat of queen h4 check. And the usual way, knight f3, in this particular case does not really work, because black's got this g5, g4 push. Again, very unpleasant. So g5 defends this pawn so that it's not easy for you to get it back, and threatens g4, and again, if your knight goes away, queen h4 check. So that's something unpleasant for white to deal with. And for that reason, in this particular case, there is another way to handle this. Again, Magnus Carlsen plays it. It's the move pawn d4. Very creative way. Again, you take a little bit of risks, but it's an interesting variation anyway. What's the deal here? Well, you allow queen h4 check, and black probably should do this. If not, you're just gonna get this pawn back and get a dominant position thanks to your strong center. So queen h4 is the move that black should play. Now after queen h4, king e2 at first looks like really bad for white. The centralized king looks vulnerable, but the trick here is that currently black cannot really attack this king because they're mostly underdeveloped, and they simply don't have any pieces in their attack apart from this queen. But a lonely queen cannot defeat white's entire army. So what you're going to do next is to play knight f3, chase this queen away. Once it goes back, you're going to get this pawn back, and your king will perhaps relocate back to f2, and you'll come back to the usual position with a lot of positional advantages. So actually you can end up being clearly having the upper hand, and it can turn out that this queen h4 was just a single check that didn't change anything. Anyway, let's see what black is going to do now. Definitely this king should be an object of an attack for black, and black will try to deliver some more checks. How can black do this? Well, the most common move is bishop pawn d6, preparing bishop g4 check. So that's the most common move. Just for a second, let me mention that in case black tries b6, trying to deliver a check that way, you can blockade it with your knight. You can go knight b5, and after bishop a6, you play pawn a4, defending it. And after that, your plan is still the same: knight f3, chase this queen away, and all this, etc. Again, the position remains to be very, very unclear, very complicated, but if your opponent is not prepared, which is usually the case, they're likely to be in trouble here. Okay, let's take this back. So the usual move is pawn d6. Now you play knight f3, attacking this queen. Black goes bishop g4, and so far it looks like really cool for black, but all of a sudden you just pick up this pawn. Black thinks, hey, but I can, now take on f3. And if white captures by the pawn, this bishop will be lost. Therefore, it drags white's king forward, which looks really dangerous, but all of a sudden it's actually all good, and white's position is great here. Black goes knight f6, preparing some sort of checks here. You play pawn g3, and basically your plan is to move your king somewhere back to safety. And after that, after queen g4 and king to g2, your king is somewhat made this artificial castling, and black has nothing, really. While you have two bishops, front center, complete dominance. So you're having a strategically winning game. Black traded queens here. We're going over the game of Magnus Carlsen. It's a blitz game against Rebecca Harris. I don't know who the guy is. Some say it's Nakamura, some say it's Naroditsky, but some grandmaster was playing this with black. Black castled. Carlsen played bishop c4, attacking this pawn, and you can easily see how black is suffering here. I mean, there is no easy way to defend this pawn, and again, white has a lot of positional advantages. Black tried a little counter trick, knight it takes e4, followed by d5, hoping to get a piece back, but it didn't work because of knight g5, pawn takes the bishop, and now knight takes f7, forking rooks, winning one of them, and white won the game in a couple moves. So that's how Magnus Carlsen used the Vienna Gambit to win, and why not you give it a try? Okay, and here's the final variation real quick. We just analyzed that queen h4 is not as dangerous as it looks at first. What if black says, hey, you attack this pawn on f4, let me just defend it by playing pawn g5. And while it's a standard move for black in the King's Gambit, and it usually works well, in this particular case, it doesn't. Because you can play pawn h4, and you just undermine this pawn chain, and black can't keep it up. Black tries pawn h6, trying to keep pawns intact. Then after pawn takes g5, black can't recapture that way because they will lose the rook. And as soon as you break up this pawn structure, you will easily just bring your knight out to f3 or e2 somehow, and you'll pick up this pawn, and you just start picking up all these weaknesses. So that's not the solution for black, so they can't defend it by their h-pawn. Defending it by their f-pawn is suicidal because it allows queen h5 check. Well, that's clearly bad. If black tries something like bishop g7, saying, hey, I'm going to counterattack here, there are lots of ways for you to deal with this position. You can start picking up these pawns on the king side, that's good. But even stronger is to push pawn d5, not letting black to capture this pawn, attacking the knight. As soon as it gets here, again, you could possibly take here on g5, but even stronger is to push d6, just to lock completely black's queen side. And now all these pieces are out of the game, and you have a big advantage in active pieces on the king side. So that's the point. You blockade this d pawn, it can't move forward anymore. And in this position, mostly black goes pawn h6, trying to solidify their pawn chain on the king side, but now they have trouble on the queen side. After knight b5, all of a sudden, you have a lot of threats there. Knight takes c7 is coming. Black takes here on d6. You could take by the knight, very strong. By the queen is even stronger. Knight c7 is coming. It's nearly a checkmate, actually. And at the very least, it's going to be a fork to the king and rook, and you're going to win the rook. So that's, again, how you can win when black tries playing similarly to the King's Gambit, but it actually